So after the shutdown of both Yuzu and Ryujinx, the future of Switch emulation is in a bit of hot water, the two titans of the scene either forced to shut down or being paid off by Nintendo. And yes, you could argue that this is a better outcome than legal action, but the facts are that yes, these projects are still gone, never to be worked on by the lead developers ever again. Emulation, despite ongoing debate, isn't illegal. Emulation involves creating software or hardware that replicates the functionality of a different system. The emulator itself replicates the original hardware, while the ROM is the game data extracted from the original console. Emulators, when created from scratch, without using proprietary code, may fall under fair use, because they aren't directly using copyrighted code. However, emulating the functionality of a console often leads to the reverse engineering of proprietary software, which can create legal issues depending on how it's done. The ROM and BIOS files, however, may infringe on copyright, as they are protected as the intellectual property of the console manufacturer. But what if you got said game with the permission of the copyright holder? This case involved the Game Genie, a device that modified games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo sued Galoob for creating a product that bypassed the console's intended limitations. The court sided with Galoob, ruling that modifying game code without distributing copies of it did not constitute infringement. The decision had implications for emulation because it reinforced the idea that modifying or altering a game's content, as emulators do, is not automatically illegal, provided it doesn't involve illegal distribution. While not directly about emulation, this case between Atari and Nintendo later on in 1992 had significant implications for video game copyrights. Atari Games, a subsidiary of Time Warner, created arcade versions of Nintendo's games, which led to a copyright dispute. The court ruled in favor of Nintendo, reaffirming the strength of video game copyright. Although not directly related to emulation, this case established the importance of protecting game content through copyrights, which would later become a key issue when emulators like Yuzu and Ryujinx began running Switch games. Both Yuzu and Ryujinx allowed players to run Switch games with higher frame rates, improved resolutions, mods, patches, new input methods, higher quality shaders, anti-aliasing, and faster load times. I think the reason why both these emulators and others before them became so successful is because you truly get to experience the games without the limitations put on them by the system. They've pushed the boundaries of what emulation can achieve and contributed to game preservation efforts. They not only made games more accessible, but they led to a more polished and enjoyable experience over the years. And these emulators weren't just about making Switch games run better, they also opened the door to modding, custom patches, and even fan-made fixes. Take Super Mario Odyssey, for example. Thanks to emulators, players have been able to explore mods that allow for more expansive movement controls or entirely new gameplay experiences. When a game gets patched on an emulator, sometimes it can feel like a whole new game. The shutdown of these emulators really deprived people of playing games they owned in the ways that they wanted to. What happens to legitimate users who still own copies of games, but wish to play them on different platforms? Emulation also has an active role in bringing fan translations to games that people would have never otherwise been able to experience. And sometimes these mods and communities bring new life into games that otherwise would have died off decades before. Emulation is about more than just playing games you own on a different platform. It's also a tool for preserving games and even entire gaming generations. With the rise of digital-only games and the fragility of physical media, projects like Yuzu and Ryujinx have played a major role in ensuring that old titles remain accessible, especially in the face of console obsolescence. When emulators go down, it's not just about the current gen, it's about the long-term future of our gaming history. I find this to be potentially harmful to creative expression, and that there is a fine line between piracy and legal emulation. Ryujinx and Yuzu, from what I see here, never broke the law law, I have seen no evidence to suggest Nintendo's proprietary code was used in these projects, and it would be very easy to disprove since everything was open source. The only thing I see is Nintendo bullying smaller teams by either threatening to bring them through the court system where they don't have enough money to win, or trying to sweeten the deal by allegedly bribing GDK-chan. What's also concerning here is how Nintendo's legal tactics ripple through the entire indie and fan game scene. While emulators like Yuzu and Ryujinx were legal projects, Nintendo's broader strategy of issuing cease and desist letters to fan games, homebrew projects, and even indie developers has made it clear that they see any form of emulation as a threat. This leaves smaller developers with the choice of either bending to the legal pressure or abandoning their projects entirely. It's a chilling effect that hurts creativity and innovation. I just wanted to mention briefly an argument that gets brought up when it comes to piracy on smaller studios. I think those who pirate a game from a team that can't afford to take a hit financially is honestly a bad thing in itself, and 9 times out of 10, I'd say don't pirate indie games. But I myself have also seen the benefit of this practice. Don't snitch. Many of these games don't have free demos available, so in some ways, these pirated versions act as a way to test the waters and see if you like a game before committing the money to buy them. As, like these smaller developers are, many people are struggling. I myself have been through many times in my life where I couldn't afford to buy any games, and I know this is an issue for a lot of people as well, especially in countries where the economy isn't doing as well. Seems like a heavy topic to discuss in a video like this, but I think it's worth noting. So remember earlier where I said these emulators were open source? That means you can take the source codes of these emulators and make your own versions or forks of them with new features and fixes. And there are so many of these that have shown up in the last few months, but I have had the pleasure of testing a few of them recently. My favorite of which being a Ryujinx fork from GreamDev that adds quality of life features to the app, such as amiibo support. But there's also a more standard fork by Reginator that just aims to preserve and reconstruct how Ryujinx was before getting shut down. In terms of Yuzu forks, we primarily have Sudachi, which is from Jared Norwell, who, ironically enough, worked on the Android port of Yuzu. These are all great forks that I recommend, and for 99% of games, you're not going to run into any issues. One thing that's certain about open source emulation is that it's never truly gone. Even with the demise of the original teams behind these emulators, their source code lives on, and that's the power of open source communities. Developers from all over the world can step in, make contributions, and ensure that the project evolves in ways that we might not have been able to predict. The beauty of open source is that even when the major players are pushed out, the community itself can take the reins. This could lead to unexpected innovations in the future, but here is where the cracks start to fall. So I was curious to see how Nintendo's first major release after shutting down Ryujinx was going to go in terms of emulation. And it got leaked weeks before release.
A man from Colorado has found himself in the legal crosshairs of a major video game company. Nintendo is suing him for potentially millions of dollars.
Now, that company is accusing the man of streaming games that hadn't been released yet.
Just this month, Nintendo filed this copyright lawsuit in Colorado federal court against Keegan, accusing him of streaming at least 10 of Nintendo's leaked games before publication and more than 50 times. For each violation, Nintendo is demanding $150,000, which could mean a cost of more than $7 million.
You know, it's one thing for a game to be leaked, but this? Streaming unreleased Nintendo games weeks before they even hit the market. That's just asking for trouble. It's like handing Nintendo the ammunition they need to shut everything down, because all it takes is one big stream of a game that's not even out yet, and suddenly we've got a massive legal target on our backs. Why take that risk? It's almost like Mario & Luigi Brothership was a kryptonite to not only the old Switch emulators, but the new ones too. Right in the first 5 minutes of you emulating this game, you're bound to come across a crashing issue. This can be rectified by turning your CPU mode to software, but it comes at the cost of performance. In fact, this game is so unstable with crashing and load times on these emulators that some would call it unplayable. And while you may see patches to make the game run at 60 or 120 FPS, it doesn't help anything when the game decides to freeze on you in the middle of a battle. At the beginning of my testing, I saw the same thing people were complaining about, but after digging into my settings, I managed to make the game not crash. But then I actually got a good example of how this would work on someone else's PC. Pocket Knot, a good friend of the channel and resident Tesla fanatic, has a PC that's only minimally less powerful than mine. But his experience setting this game up on the exact same emulator was so much more different than how it was with me. The game would go from crashing, not booting up, and dropping to as low as 2 frames per second, an issue which wouldn't have happened before given the right dev team and support. It's been a while since this game came out, and I have yet to see a single emulator fix this issue for one of the biggest releases of the year. And that's likely because they're all scared. All those games that worked before are still flawless to this very day, and they look even better than what Nintendo has to offer. But in the future, it's starting to look a bit more bleak. Gabe Newell, the president and co-founder of Valve, once said in a response to Piracy, "One thing that we have all learned is that piracy is not a pricing issue, it's a service issue." And this is what I think encapsulates Nintendo the most at this point. Rather than making hardware capable of what these emulators are doing, they seek to strip them down. One issue that often gets conflated with legal emulation is piracy. While it's undeniable that some users will always choose the illegal route, emulators themselves aren't inherently malicious. The ability to back up and play games on different hardware is something that should be embraced, not villainized. Imagine a way to officially back up your purchased Switch games into an official Nintendo PC emulator, allowing you to play on not only the Switch, but on your PC for years to come. Why not just target the websites illegally sharing the games, rather than the emulators that run them? And can you even blame the pirates for not wanting to buy them when the games look and run so much better elsewhere? The Switch has always been a unique piece of hardware. Its hybrid nature, for instance, makes it perfect for emulation. But with the Switch 2 on the horizon, Nintendo will have to decide whether to continue fighting emulators or embrace the innovations that they give. If the Switch 2 follows the same formula of trying to lock down on hardware with proprietary restrictions, we could very well see the same thing play out again. I imagine that the Switch 2 won't be of much help here either, but if you wanted to see my full thoughts on what the future of Nintendo's hardware might be and how Nintendo could find inspiration from the biggest tech company in the world, make sure to check out this video here. It's pretty insane.